Why is it illegal in this state to make an ugly face at a dog, yet perfectly normal for an entire working seaport to exist 450 miles from the nearest ocean? Welcome to 71 Dumbest Things About Oklahoma, where we are exposing the wildest historical facts, like the time the state governor declared martial law over an oil field just to stop armed riots, alongside absurd laws about hotel bed sheets and the myths you still believe, like thinking Oklahoma's famous Dust Bowl was just bad luck. We are proving which insane stories are 100% real history and which are just dirt road lies. So hit that subscribe button before we reveal the truth. 1. The Oklahoma State Capitol is the only Capitol building in the entire world sitting on top of a working oil well. While governors held press conferences and lawmakers debated bills inside, petroleum was being actively drilled and pumped straight from beneath the building's foundation from 1941 to 2016. Oklahoma literally struck oil under its own government headquarters, and instead of stopping, they just kept pumping it for 75 straight years. 2. For 18 full years, Oklahoma's panhandle belonged to absolutely nobody. When Texas gave up the Strip to stay below the slavery boundary line and Congress simply forgot to officially claim it, this chunk of land had zero laws, zero government, and zero country owning it. Settlers, outlaws, and free spirits moved in freely because no authority on earth had any legal right to stop them or arrest them for anything they did there. 3. Oklahoma was the only state in entire America to completely ban tattoo parlors and kept that ban locked in place from 1963 all the way to 2006. Every Oklahoman who wanted a tattoo during those decades had zero legal options inside their own state. They loaded up their cars and drove hours across the border into Texas or Kansas just to get inked. Oklahoma legislators sat comfortably in their offices for 43 straight years, genuinely convinced that tattoo parlors were simply too dangerous for their own citizens to ever access. 4. On May 3, 1999, a tornado touched down near Bridge Creek, Oklahoma, and did something no storm had ever done anywhere on Earth before. Scientists and storm chasers measured wind speeds of 301 miles per hour, making it the highest surface wind speed ever officially recorded in all of human history. Meteorologists who spent entire careers studying extreme weather stared at their instruments in total disbelief. Oklahoma did not just have a terrible tornado that day. It briefly became the single most violently windy place the entire planet had ever produced. 5. In 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was one of the wealthiest black communities in the entire United States. So prosperous, it was called Black Wall Street. Then, over 2 horrific days, a mob burned it completely to the ground, killed hundreds, and left thousands with absolutely nothing. What followed was somehow even more outrageous. Oklahoma's government deliberately scrubbed this massacre from official textbooks and kept it completely hidden for over 75 years. Entire generations of Oklahoma students graduated without ever hearing one single word about what happened in their own state. 6. Oklahoma began constructing its Capitol Dome in 1914 with enormous statewide pride and grand ambitions. Then the money completely ran out in 1917, and the entire project was simply abandoned. The state left the top of its own Capitol building sitting totally empty, unfinished and bald for 90 consecutive years, while governors worked underneath it and tourists stared upward with genuinely confused expressions. Oklahoma finally completed the dome in 2002, spending $200 million to finish a project they had casually walked away from nearly an entire century earlier. 7. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, the centerpiece celebration was a theatrical wedding ceremony in Guthrie, where 2 hired actors performed a symbolic marriage representing Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory joining together. Crowds cheered, and newspaper photographers captured every moment. What nobody officially mentioned that day was that 67 fully functioning Native American nations had been governing that exact land for decades, and not a single one of them received any invitation to participate in or even acknowledge a ceremony being staged directly on their own ancestral territory. 8. Oklahoma's state legislature once burned through an entire official government session passionately arguing about the contents of a dinner plate. When lawmakers attempted to establish an official state meal, the single most heated debate was whether cornbread qualified as a bread or as a side dish. Grown elected adults sat in formal government chambers, arguing this with complete seriousness while taxpayer money funded every single minute of it. Oklahoma eventually passed the meal into law, featuring chicken fried steak and squash, and cornbread's long, painful identity crisis was finally resolved inside a government committee room. 9. Oklahoma's official state bird is the scissor-tailed flycatcher, a striking creature with a dramatically long forked tail that makes it one of the most visually distinctive birds in all of North America. Oklahoma placed it proudly on official state seals and government documents for decades. Researchers then surveyed actual everyday Oklahomans and discovered that the overwhelming majority of residents could not name the bird, identify it from a photograph, or describe a single thing about what it looked like. Oklahoma's most proudly celebrated symbol was a complete mystery to the very people it was meant to represent. 10. Oklahoma spent so many consecutive years ranking dead last in teacher pay across the entire United States that its educators finally ran completely out of patience. In 2018, teachers across the whole state walked off the job simultaneously and drove to Oklahoma City, where they occupied the state capitol for 9 straight days, refusing to leave or return to classrooms. It became one of the most visible teacher strikes in modern American history, sparked entirely because Oklahoma had spent years paying the people responsible for educating its children less than literally every other state in the country. 11. Oklahoma sits in the most tornado-dense corridor on the entire planet, a stretch of land that gets hit by more twisters than anywhere else on Earth. Yet for decades, Oklahoma kept building its public schools with absolutely no basements whatsoever. Children sat in classrooms directly above ground level while tornado sirens screamed outside. State officials approved construction budget after construction budget for new school buildings, and somehow nobody in any of those meetings raised a hand to ask why they were skipping the one feature that could actually keep children alive during a storm. 12. During the 1920s oil boom, Tulsa, Oklahoma, transformed into one of the richest cities in the entire United States practically overnight. Tulsa millionaires were so flush with fresh oil money that some of them literally stood on top of buildings and threw cash down into the streets below, while crowds scrambled to grab it. Tulsa was officially nicknamed the oil capital of the world during this period, and its mansions, jazz clubs, and Art Deco architecture reflected a city that genuinely believed the money would never stop flowing, and the good times would never end. 13. Oklahoma decided that cheating on your spouse was not just morally wrong, but criminally dangerous, and made adultery an actual felony offense punishable by up to 5 years in state prison. This was not some dusty, forgotten law from the 1800s that nobody enforced. Oklahoma maintained it as one of the harshest adultery statutes anywhere in the entire United States. The state that struggled to fund its own schools and libraries somehow found the time and energy to make marital infidelity one of its most seriously punished criminal offenses on the books. 14. Oklahoma has more federally recognized Native American tribes than any other state in the entire country, representing an extraordinary depth of indigenous history, culture, and governance that stretches back centuries before European settlers ever arrived. Despite this remarkable distinction, Oklahoma's standard public school textbooks dedicate fewer than 2 full pages to covering Native American history in any meaningful way. Students in a state that is more connected to Native American heritage than anywhere else in America were graduating with almost zero knowledge about the people and nations that shaped everything around them. 15. The Land Run. Of 1889 was supposed to be a fair race where thousands of settlers lined up at the starting boundary and charged into unassigned Oklahoma land at the sound of a pistol shot. The problem was that a significant number of participants cheated by sneaking across the boundary line hours or even days before the official start, and hiding inside the territory waiting for everyone else to arrive. These cheaters were called Sooners. Oklahoma was so proud of this legacy of organized cheating that it officially adopted Sooners as its state nickname and plasters it across everything. 16. Oklahoma City planners in the 1990s looked at their struggling downtown and decided what the city desperately needed was a beautiful European-style canal system to attract tourists and breathe new life into the area. Millions of dollars were spent designing and constructing the Bricktown Canal. and city officials celebrated its grand opening with enormous enthusiasm. Engineers and visitors then quickly noticed that the canal barely contained enough water to float a standard kayak without scraping the bottom. Oklahoma had built itself a decorative puddle and called it a landmark waterway. 17. Oklahoma's official state animal is the bison, a majestic creature that once roamed the plains of Oklahoma. In herds so massive, they stretched from one horizon to the other and numbered in the tens of millions. Oklahoma selected the bison as its proud state symbol and put it on official seals and government materials. The deeply uncomfortable detail nobody liked to discuss was that the bison was systematically hunted to the very edge of total extinction, specifically on Oklahoma land, with hunters killing entire herds in a single day until almost none were left standing anywhere. 18. Oklahoma is the birthplace of Sonic Drive-In, one of the most recognizable fast food chains in the entire United States, with thousands of locations across the country serving millions of customers every single day. What the cheerful Sonic branding never quite advertises is that founder Troy Smith's original concept was a struggling root beer stand in Shawnee, Oklahoma, that was hemorrhaging money and nearly drove him into complete financial ruin. The billion-dollar drive-in empire that became an American institution almost collapsed before it ever served its second customer. 19. There is a town in Oklahoma called Bowlegs, a name that stops every first-time visitor dead in their tracks and demands an immediate explanation. The town was named after Billy Bowlegs, a respected and historically significant Seminole chief who played a major role in Native American resistance during the 19th century. Researchers who visited Bowlegs and surveyed local residents discovered that the overwhelming majority of people living there could not say who Billy Bowlegs was, when he lived, or why their town was named after him. The man behind the name had been completely forgotten by the place that bore it. 20. Oklahoma was never historically considered earthquake territory, and for most of its history, the state recorded almost no significant seismic activity whatsoever. Then the oil and gas industry began injecting massive amounts of wastewater deep underground through disposal wells starting around 2009, and everything changed almost immediately. Oklahoma began experiencing earthquakes at a rate that eventually surpassed California, the state Americans have always associated with earthquakes above any other. Scientists confirmed the injection. Wells were directly causing the quakes, and Oklahoma suddenly found itself shaking on a daily basis because of its own energy industry. 21. For decades, Oklahoma sold mineral rights on Native American-owned land for prices so low they were essentially giveaways, allowing oil and gas companies to extract enormous wealth from territory that legally belonged to Native tribes. The state operated this way for generations, while Native communities saw almost none of the profits from resources pulled directly out of their own land. Then in 2020, the United States Supreme Court dropped a ruling that stunned the entire state by confirming that nearly half of all Oklahoma land is still legally and officially Native American territory. 22. Oklahoma has an actual law sitting in its official state statutes, making it illegal to make an ugly face at a dog. This is not a joke, not a myth, and not a misprint. The law genuinely exists, carries real penalties including fines and potential jail time, and was passed by actual elected legislators who apparently felt this was a pressing matter requiring urgent government attention. Oklahoma was struggling with underfunded schools, crumbling roads, and a teacher pay crisis, while somewhere in the legislature a serious adult human being was crafting a bill to protect dogs from mean expressions. 23. Oklahoma is one of the most landlocked states in the entire continental United States, sitting hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline in every single direction. Despite this geographic reality, Oklahoma went ahead and built a fully functioning commercial seaport. The Port of Catoosa sits 450 miles from the nearest ocean, operates on the Arkansas River, and handles millions of tons of cargo every single year. It cost millions of dollars to construct and required an entire artificial waterway system to make functional. Oklahoma built itself an ocean port without an ocean, and somehow it actually works. 24. Oklahoma's public school system spent years teaching creationism directly alongside evolution in science classrooms, presenting a religious origin story as a legitimate scientific alternative to one of the most thoroughly documented theories in all of modern biology. Parents sued, scientists objected, and legal battles dragged through Oklahoma courts for decades, consuming enormous amounts of time, money, and public energy. The state that ranked near the bottom nationally for education outcomes was simultaneously spending its limited resources fighting courtroom battles over whether its science teachers were allowed to teach actual science to their students. 25. In 1905, Native American leaders across Oklahoma did something remarkable and organized. They drafted a fully written constitution, held democratic elections, established a functioning governmental framework, and formally proposed creating an entirely separate Native American state called Sequoia that would exist alongside other American states. The proposal was detailed, serious, and legally sound. Native leaders then sent the entire package to the United States Congress in Washington, fully expecting a formal review and response. Congress received it, looked at it, and rejected the entire proposal without holding a single debate or discussion about it. 26. Every single year, the small Oklahoma town of Waynoka hosts what is officially recognized as the world's largest rattlesnake roundup, an event that draws thousands of enthusiastic tourists from across the country to watch teams of hunters capture massive quantities of live rattlesnakes from the surrounding prairie. The snakes are then displayed, handled, and killed in front of cheering crowds who treat the whole spectacle as wholesome family entertainment. Oklahoma embraced this tradition so completely that Waynoka built an entire local economy and tourism identity around the annual mass capture and public killing of venomous snakes. 27. Oklahoma, and specifically the city of Tulsa, carries an extremely passionate belief that the cheeseburger was invented there in 1934 at a restaurant called Kalen's by a cook who simply decided to add a slice of cheese to a hamburger patty and accidentally created one of the most beloved foods in American history. The problem is that 4 other states make the exact same claim with equally enthusiastic conviction and equally thin supporting historical evidence. Nobody can definitively prove where the cheeseburger was born, and Oklahoma refuses to entertain even the slightest possibility that Tulsa was not the birthplace. 28. Somewhere in eastern Oklahoma, there is a small quiet town with a population of under 700 people that goes by the name OK. Just OK. The town is named OK, Oklahoma, and its residents have leaned into this completely unintentional comedic gift with absolute enthusiasm. Local businesses use the name in their branding. The town sign has become a popular roadside photo destination, and the people of OK carry an intense and genuine pride about living in a place whose entire identity rests on being the most aggressively mediocre-sounding address in the United States. 29. Oklahoma sits in a region of the United States that meteorologists consider one of the most severe hailstorm zones on the entire planet. The state regularly experiences hailstorms that produce stones the size of softballs, heavy enough to destroy car roofs, shatter windows, and cause millions of dollars in property damage in a single afternoon. Despite living in this environment and knowing full well what Oklahoma weather is capable of, the state consistently ranks among the lowest in the entire nation for storm shelter ownership. Oklahomans live under the most dangerous skies in America, and most of them have nowhere safe to go. 30. At the height of its oil boom, Oklahoma was so dominant in petroleum production that Tulsa earned the official title of Oil Capital of the World, a designation that came with genuine global prestige and almost unimaginable wealth flowing through the state. Oklahoma built its entire identity, economy, and government budget around being an oil powerhouse. Today, that same state which once supplied petroleum to the world now imports the majority of its own refined gasoline from Texas. Oklahoma went from being the planet's oil capital to buying its gas from its neighbor. 31. Oklahoma City invented the world's very first parking meter in 1935, a small coin-operated device created by Carl May G that was installed on the streets of downtown Oklahoma City to manage the growing chaos of automobile traffic. The city celebrated this as a genuine civic innovation and a sign of modern progress. Drivers did not celebrate. Furious motorists immediately began filing lawsuits arguing that the parking meter was an unconstitutional tax on public streets and that the government had absolutely no legal right to charge citizens money simply for stopping their car on a public road. 32. Oklahoma decided in the early 2000s that what the small city of Ardmore desperately needed was a world-class motorsports facility and invested $60 million into building a NASCAR-style racing complex that officials promised would transform the region into a major sports tourism destination. Fans would pour in from across the country, hotels would fill up, and Ardmore would become synonymous with high-speed racing entertainment. The track opened, the crowds never came, and the facility shut down within 3 years of opening due to attendance numbers so low they barely covered the cost of keeping the lights on. 33. Oklahoma quietly became the first state in the entire United States to normalize something that would have seemed completely unthinkable to previous generations of American parents and educators. Facing catastrophic budget shortfalls and an inability to fund schools 5 days a week, dozens of Oklahoma school districts cut the academic week down to just 4 days. Children across the state began attending school Monday through Thursday, while Friday disappeared entirely from the school calendar. Oklahoma did not present this as a crisis. It presented it as a practical solution, and other struggling states began paying very close attention. 34. When Prohibition ended in 1933 and the rest of the United States collectively exhaled and reopened its bars, breweries, and liquor stores, Oklahoma looked at the situation and decided to stay dry anyway. The state maintained its alcohol ban for 51 additional years after national prohibition ended, longer than any other state in the country by a significant margin. While Oklahomans could not legally buy a drink anywhere in their own state, bootleggers operating in the shadows were doing extraordinary business. Illegal alcohol quietly became one of the most profitable underground industries the state had ever produced. 35. Oklahoma is home to 7 different species of venomous snakes, a concentration of deadly reptiles per square mile that exceeds almost every other state in the entire country. Rattlesnakes, copperheads, and cottonmouths move through Oklahoma's grasslands, forests, and riverbeds in numbers that would make most Americans deeply uncomfortable. What makes Oklahoma's relationship with its venomous snake population truly unique is that state law actually permits the legal sale of live rattlesnakes at county fairs. Oklahomans did not just learn to live alongside some of the most dangerous snakes in North America, they turned them into a marketplace commodity. 36. Oklahoma had one of the strangest alcohol laws in the entire United States that survived completely intact until 2018. For decades, it was perfectly legal to buy beer in Oklahoma grocery stores and convenience shops, but there was one very specific and deeply confusing condition attached to that permission. The beer had to be warm. Stores could only legally sell beer at room temperature. If a retailer wanted to sell cold refrigerated beer, they were required to obtain a full liquor store license. Oklahomans who wanted a cold beer with their groceries had to drive to a separate building to get one. 37. The Broadway musical Oklahoma has been performed in theaters across America and around the world for decades, celebrated as a beloved piece of American cultural history with catchy songs and a charming portrait of pioneer life in the Oklahoma Territory. There is one significant problem with this portrait. The musical contains almost no historical accuracy whatsoever about what life in actual Oklahoma was actually like. Rodgers and Hammerstein, the show's creators, openly acknowledge this themselves, admitting that historical authenticity was never their goal. Oklahoma the state and Oklahoma the musical share little beyond the name on the marquee. 38. Oklahoma experiences a weather phenomenon so dramatic and so fast that it genuinely baffled atmospheric scientists for decades after it was first documented. Called a blue norther, this event occurs when a cold front slams into Oklahoma with such sudden and overwhelming force that outdoor temperatures can plunge by 50 degrees Fahrenheit in less than a single hour. A warm, pleasant afternoon can transform into a bitter, freezing evening before most people have time to retrieve a jacket from inside their house. Oklahoma does not just have unpredictable weather. It has weather that operates on a completely different set of physical rules. 39. Oklahoma spent the early and middle decades of the 20th century riding an oil boom so massive and so profitable that state governments stopped worrying about building a diversified economy and simply based its entire annual budget on crude oil revenue alone. As long as oil prices stayed high, Oklahoma was flush with money, and nobody in government felt any urgency to plan for anything different. Then, in 1986, global oil prices crashed suddenly and dramatically, and Oklahoma found itself staring at a financial catastrophe it had no backup plan for and nearly went completely bankrupt trying to survive it. 40. Oklahoma Governor William Murray, a man so aggressively particular about betting that history remembers him by the nickname Alfalfa Bill, personally pushed through a state law in 1908 requiring all hotel bed sheets across Oklahoma to be long enough to simultaneously cover both the head and the feet of a sleeping guest. This law was not inspired by public health concerns or consumer protection research. It was passed entirely because Alfalfa Bill Murray had personally stayed in too many Oklahoma hotels, with sheets he found offensively short, and decided the full power of state government was the appropriate solution to his problem. 41. The Oklahoma City Thunder was never supposed to stay. When Hurricane Katrina drowned New Orleans in 2005, the NBA needed a temporary home for the Hornets, and Oklahoma City raised its hand like an eager kid in class. Then, in 2008, Seattle's Supersonics got quietly relocated to Oklahoma City as a permanent move. The city that borrowed a team suddenly owned one. Oklahoma never gave it back, and nobody seriously asked them to either. 42. Oklahoma loved segregation so much it kept doing it even after everyone else stopped. The state maintained racially divided schools until 1955, but several districts looked at federal desegregation orders and basically shrugged. Some quietly delayed full integration for another decade, pretending the paperwork got lost somewhere. While the rest of the country was moving forward, certain Oklahoma school districts were still arguing about whether following the law was really necessary or just a suggestion from Washington. 43. Timothy McVeigh was not some shadowy foreign terrorist. He was a decorated United States Army veteran who drove a rented truck full of homemade explosives into the heart of Oklahoma City on an ordinary April morning in 1995. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building collapsed in seconds. 168 people died, including 19 children in a daycare upstairs. It remained the deadliest domestic terror attack in American history for years, and the killer had served his country honorably before planning it. 44. Oklahoma wildlife managers looked at the Arkansas River carp problem and thought the obvious solution was throwing something bigger and meaner into the water. They stocked the river with thousands of pounds of alligator gar, an ancient predator fish, expecting nature to handle things efficiently. Nature did not cooperate. The gar ignored the carp, disrupted the existing ecosystem, and the invasive carp continued thriving anyway. Oklahoma had essentially thrown a second problem into the water to distract from the first one. 45. Someone in the Oklahoma legislature stood up one day and proposed making strawberry the official state fruit, and everyone agreed. The only problem was that Oklahoma grows almost zero commercial strawberries. The state has no significant strawberry farms, no strawberry industry, and no agricultural reputation involving strawberries whatsoever. But the vote passed, the strawberry got its title, and Oklahoma proudly printed it on official documents while continuing to import strawberries from states that actually grow them in meaningful quantities. 46. Peacher, Oklahoma was a thriving mining town until the ground itself turned against its residents. Decades of lead and zinc mining left the soil so poisoned with toxic waste that children were being slowly contaminated just by playing outside. The federal government eventually declared the entire town a Superfund site and bought everyone out in a forced evacuation. Residents packed their homes and left forever. Peacher now sits completely empty, a ghost town still slowly poisoning the groundwater with nobody left to notice. 47. Oklahoma sat directly in the path of more tornadoes than any region on Earth, and for most of its history, it had absolutely no coordinated emergency alert system to warn anyone. Decades passed with twisters regularly destroying towns, killing families, and flattening everything in sight before the state finally built a proper statewide warning network in the 1990s. The tornado capital of the world spent over a century being repeatedly demolished before deciding that maybe residents deserved a few minutes of advance notice. 48. Oklahoma burns billions of cubic feet of natural gas directly into the open sky every single year. Oil and gas companies drill wells, extract what they want, and simply flare off the leftover natural gas in giant open flames because capturing it costs money they would rather not spend. The amount wasted annually exceeds the total energy production of multiple small countries. Oklahoma sits on enormous energy wealth, lights the atmosphere on fire with it regularly, and calls this standard industry practice. 49. An Oklahoma legislator once sat down, thought deeply about the pressing issues facing the state, and decided the most urgent problem was hotel room seating. The result was an actual law requiring every hotel and motel room in Oklahoma to contain at least one chair. Not a bed, not functioning plumbing, not clean water. A chair. The statute is real. It remains on the books. And Oklahoma legislators apparently considered this a productive use of official government session time and taxpayer resources. 50. Oklahoma City planners. In the 1990s, looked at the city's sad riverfront and decided what it desperately needed was a romantic gondola system like Venice. Engineers were brought in, proposals were drawn up, and excitement was genuinely building until someone checked how much water was actually in the river. The answer was barely any. The Canadian River through downtown Oklahoma City was essentially a wide sandy ditch with occasional puddles. The gondola dream was quietly shelved, and nobody officially admitted how far the planning had gone. 51. Oklahoma ranks in the bottom 5 nationally for adult literacy, which is already embarrassing enough on its own. But the state legislature looked at that statistic and decided the best response was cutting public library funding 6 consecutive years in a row. Not once, not twice, 6 times in a row. The very buildings that exist to help people read and learn were being systematically defunded by the same government that was puzzled about why nobody in Oklahoma could read properly. 52. In 1936, the entire country was watching Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs feed starving Americans and rebuild a broken economy. Oklahoma looked at all of that and voted against it, the only state in the nation to do so. The same Oklahoma where thousands of its own citizens were literally packing wagons and fleeing westward because the Dust Bowl had destroyed everything they owned. Oklahoma was starving, desperate, and leaving in droves while simultaneously voting against the food being offered to them. 53. Oklahoma wildlife officials in the 1970s had an algae problem in their waterways and came up with what seemed like a perfectly reasonable solution. They introduced Asian carp, a non-native species, specifically to eat the algae and clean things up naturally. The carp had other plans. They ate everything, multiplied faster than anyone projected, outcompeted every native fish species, and spread to waterways nobody intended them to reach. Oklahoma invited a biological disaster into its rivers and called it a management strategy. 54. Oklahoma legislators once gathered in official session to debate the classification of watermelon. A proposal came forward to name it the official state vegetable. Someone in the room pointed out, correctly, that watermelon is botanically a fruit and always has been. The legislators listened carefully to that scientific information, nodded thoughtfully, and then voted to classify it as a vegetable anyway. The watermelon became Oklahoma's official state vegetable, and the botanical definition of fruit apparently had no standing in Oklahoma government chambers. 55. There is a small town in Oklahoma called Hooker, and its residents are absolutely delighted about it. The high school athletic teams are officially called the Hookers. The mascot proudly appears on uniforms and banners, and locally branded merchandise featuring the name sells out every single year without fail. Outsiders arrive expecting embarrassment and find instead a community that has fully committed to the joke with zero apologies. Hooker, Oklahoma decided long ago that if you cannot change your name, you might as well own it completely. 56. Anyone who has ever driven through Oklahoma knows the dirt. There is a deep, almost aggressive shade of red that stains everything it touches permanently. Clothing, concrete, car tires, and shoes all turn the same stubborn rust color after contact with Oklahoma soil. What almost nobody knows is that despite sitting on top of this intensely red earth for generations, Oklahoma conducted no official geological study explaining why the dirt was so dramatically red until sometime in the 1970s. They just lived in it and never asked why. 57. The Glenpool oil field discovery in 1905 turned a quiet patch of Oklahoma land into one of the most chaotic and violent places in the entire country almost overnight. Thousands of workers flooded in, disputes over land and money turned deadly, and armed confrontations became a daily occurrence around the wells. The situation escalated so badly and so fast that the territorial governor stepped in and declared martial law over an oil field. Oklahoma needed military intervention just to stop workers from shooting each other over crude oil. 58. Oklahoma legislators in 2015 looked at the list of things that could officially represent their state and decided what was missing was a sacred religious text. They formally proposed making the Bible the official state book of Oklahoma. The bill passed through committee with genuine enthusiasm before someone quietly checked the Oklahoma State Constitution and discovered that establishing an official religious text for the government violated the Constitution they had all sworn to uphold. The bill was struck down by Oklahoma's own laws stopping Oklahoma from doing it. 59. Someone in Oklahoma once built a McDonald's directly over an interstate highway. Not next to the highway, not near the highway, but as a two-story structure physically bridging Interstate 40 so that drivers could look up and see the golden arches spanning the road above them. It was the largest McDonald's ever constructed in the world at the time. Tourists stopped specifically to eat inside a fast food restaurant built like an overpass. It eventually closed and became mostly a roadside curiosity that people photographed from below. 60. Oklahoma passed a law requiring students to learn about the official state rock, which is Rose Rock, a reddish barite crystal formation found mainly in central Oklahoma. The legislation mandated Rose Rock education be included in school curriculum. Around the same time, the state was actively cutting funding for core subject textbooks in math, reading, and science. Oklahoma made sure every child knew the name of a decorative mineral while simultaneously making it harder for teachers to afford the books needed to teach children how to actually read. 61. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s did not just randomly happen to Oklahoma. Settlers who arrived after the land run spent decades plowing up the native grasslands that had held the soil together for thousands of years. The deep root systems of those grasses were the only thing keeping the topsoil in place. When farmers ripped all of it out and planted crops instead, the soil had nothing anchoring it. One drought later, and Oklahoma's entire surface was airborne and heading toward California. 62. Oklahoma already had an official state animal, which is the bison. But at some point, a group of legislators sat down and decided that was not enough, and the state also needed an official state game animal. So they passed a second bill naming the white-tailed deer as the official state game animal. Oklahoma now has two separate official state animals established through two separate pieces of legislation because apparently one animal representing an entire state felt incomplete to the people writing the laws. 63. The Michelin Guide is the most prestigious restaurant rating system in the entire world, and it has never once formally evaluated a single restaurant in Oklahoma. 0 Michelin stars have ever been awarded anywhere in the state. Most places that get skipped by Michelin are quietly embarrassed about it. Oklahoma reacted differently. A significant portion of Oklahomans discovered this fact and responded with genuine pride, treating the complete absence of fine dining recognition as proof that Oklahoma does not need fancy French critics telling them what good food is. 64. Standing in downtown Tulsa, there is a 76-foot-tall golden statue of an oil worker that locals call the Golden Driller. He is enormous. He is golden. He wears a hard hat, and he permanently stands in a wide stance with one hand resting on an actual oil. Derek beside him, like he is posing for the cover of a superhero comic. Tulsa decided this giant golden oil man was the perfect symbol for their city and made him an official landmark that tourists now visit specifically to stare up at in genuine confusion. 65. Oklahoma gets hit with ice storms so severe and so destructive that entire regional power grids have collapsed under the weight of accumulated ice on power lines. Hundreds of thousands of residents have been left without heat or electricity for days at a time during these events. Despite this happening repeatedly across multiple decades, Oklahoma has built almost no redundant power infrastructure specifically designed to survive ice storms. The state gets knocked out by ice on a regular schedule and rebuilds the exact same vulnerable system every single time. 66. Sylvan Goldman was running a grocery store in Oklahoma City in 1937, and he had a simple problem. Customers could only buy as much as they could carry in a handheld basket. Goldman looked at a folding chair, looked at a basket, and combined them into a wheeled cart that customers could push through the store. He had just invented the shopping cart. Every massive warehouse store, every grocery run, every cart you have ever pushed through a parking lot traces directly back to one Oklahoma City grocery store owner who was tired of watching people struggle with their hands full. 67. When the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, Oklahoma's legislature gathered in official session and passed a formal resolution declaring the federal law null and void within Oklahoma's borders. They voted on it, signed it, and announced it proudly. The resolution was completely non-binding, carried absolutely zero legal weight, and changed nothing about how the Affordable Care Act applied to Oklahoma or its residents. Oklahoma had essentially written and strongly worded letter to the federal government, framed it as legislation, and celebrated like something had actually been accomplished. 68. The Canadian River runs through Oklahoma, and for generations engineers and planners looked at it and saw potential. 5 separate dam projects were proposed across different decades, each one designed to tame the river and create something useful from it. All 5 projects were started. All 5 projects were abandoned before completion. The Canadian River outlasted every single attempt to control it, sitting there quietly while Oklahoma spent money, drew up plans, broke ground, and then walked away 5 separate times without finishing anything. 69. Oklahoma's entire system for funding public schools was taken to court, and in 2015, the state's own Supreme Court ruled that the funding formula was unconstitutional. Not a federal court, not outside critics, Borti. Oklahoma's own highest court looked at how the state was paying for education and declared it legally broken. The legislature received that ruling, acknowledged it existed, and then took 3 full years to even partially begin addressing it. Oklahoma's schools were ruled unconstitutionally underfunded, and the response was essentially a very long pause. 70. In 1905, a group of native leaders from across Indian Territory did something remarkable. They drafted a full state constitution, organized democratic elections, established a functioning government structure, and formally applied to the United States Congress to create a new state called Sequoia. It was a serious, legitimate, thoroughly prepared proposal representing dozens of native nations. Congress received the application, looked it over, and rejected it without holding a single formal debate. The most organized statehood effort in the region was dismissed without anyone in Washington bothering to officially discuss it. 71. Oklahoma's official state motto is Labor Omnia Vincit, a Latin phrase meaning hard work conquers all things. It is printed on the state seal, displayed in government buildings, and taught to school children as the foundational value of Oklahoma identity. It is also worth noting that Oklahoma consistently ranks in the bottom 10 states nationally for workforce wages, economic mobility, and opportunities for residents to actually improve their financial situation through work. Oklahoma has enshrined the idea that hard work conquers everything while building a system where hard work conquers almost nothing. Oklahoma put an oil well under its own capital, declared watermelon a vegetable, and built a seaport 400 miles from the ocean. And somehow this is only one state. Drop a comment below telling us which fact absolutely broke your brain. If you survived all 71, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to Dumbest Things, and stay tuned because we are just getting started.